All right, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of the Two Savage Four Democrats podcast debate. We are debating again. Of course, we have Brian here today, who is here from a different account, so that's why his logo is
long story.
Yeah, long story behind that. But anyway, he's here from a different account, and we also have with us today Alex. And we are going to be debating 9/11, chemtrails, and we're going to get into some other topics as well. It's going to be a very interesting debate. I am really excited to get this going. But we're going to start off with 9/11. And this is a topic that comes up frequently when you talk about debates. I mean, everybody wants to, everyone has their position on 9/11. People are very enthusiastic about their side in 9/11. So I am going to go ahead and there's a lot of different conspiracies involving 9/11. And I don't want to assume what you believe is a conspiracy and what you believe is real. So I am going to go ahead and allow you, Alex, at the beginning of this debate to please tell me exactly tell me exactly what is a conspiracy in 9/11. So just tell me exactly what you believe in regards to 9/11, and then we'll go from there.
Hello?
You freeze up?
You get nervous?
Dude, that was a killer intro. If I have to redo that whole thing, I'm going to be so mad.
Maybe his mic isn't working? It took him a second when he joined. It wasn't working either. And then
okay. Here we go.
Okay. Is it working? So did you hear what I said?
Okay, so yeah, I heard what you said.
Yes.
So what you see, I believe it was an inside job. Well, not like it was. Not that it wasn't a terrorist attack, but like I believe that they hired actual terrorists to like have played parts in the role into pretending it was an actual terrorist attack. Like they got actual Muslims to portray these terrorists. But I mean, to me, some of these attacks that happened wouldn't have been realistically possible. So that's why I believe like 9/11 was an inside job within the government.
Okay, let me ask you this.
What makes you think they paid someone, though?
Let me just ask this really quick because I just want to make sure he knows this fact. This is pretty crucial. Do you know that the bombs that were used by the people on the plane were actually fake? Are you aware of that? Because that's a huge thing you have to keep in mind here is that those bombs that they used on the planes, they were not real bombs. They were fake bombs. People thought they were real, and that is why they were able to pull off the attack. It had nothing to do with the fact they were real bombs. So it's not as complex as a lot of people like to imagine it being.
Well, and real quick, what makes you think they paid actors? Like, what's your evidence for that?
Oh, my evidence?
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's with the actors of the Muslims. I wouldn't say that they're actors, but like, I mean, I mentioned that they were some type of actors, but like, again, I could just believe that like, they could have been hired.
Well, what is it you exactly believe? Because you just said they're like hired actors, and now you're saying you don't think they're necessarily hired. What do you think's the conspiracy here? That way we can have a discussion about it.
Well, okay, so like I believe they were hired, but actors is probably a bit of a term being too exaggerated.
So you think they basically paid terrorists to go ahead and commit the act, right?
Well, to try to commit the act, as the bombs were fake, as he said on the plane.
What's your evidence that they?
However, I feel like there's less evidence to assume that they were paid off by the government than there is to assume that
they were just terrorists. I mean,
obviously,
for that?
The thing is they had been planning an attack on the World Trade Center for a very, very long time. They did an attack in the 90s while Bill Clinton was president, and he actually ignored that attack. So, and if it was set up by the government, don't you think that they'd choose a different target other than one that was already attacked? Like, wouldn't that be obvious? Like, why wouldn't they have picked a different target? What I think is that they were aiming for this. They tried it in the 90s. It didn't work, and they planned another attack, right? This wasn't that hard to do. Remember, this was a time before the TSA was invented. Airplane security was very, very low. You could essentially just walk into the airport and get on your plane, right? And there was nobody even had any speculations about anything involving, Middle Eastern people at that time. I mean, they had some, but for the most part, not as much as there is right now. I feel like, for the government to also, you look at the Monica Lewinsky scandal, 3 people knew about it. It was blown open by 3 people. And then you look at, 9/11, there were, people who were first responders on the scene, engineers who, have investigated the attacks. all kinds of different people. None of them have been able to, like, nobody credible has been able to debunk 9/11. Like, the people just haven't come out. I mean, the government could be hiding it, but plenty of other people have looked at the incident, first responders, everything like that. You think somebody would come out and say, yeah, this was faked.
And also, what's your evidence that they hired actors?
Well, my evidence, I can't really display it because my browser is what do you call it?
Well, just explain it to me.
Okay, so like, well, because I believe like a certain like amount of people were hired for like a big event such as 9/11, and it's usually been proven throughout like that these people have been faked, and then they've been living on different lies. Later on,
what's your proof that they're alive?
I remember there was there's some pictures of like the people, the ones that crashed into Pennsylvania.
The terrorist?
No, not the terrorist.
Okay.
You're talking about Flight 93.
The passengers?
Yeah, the passengers. Like only like some of them. Because I remember.
So you're saying that some of the passengers survived that crash, right? That's what you're telling me.
Not survived it, but like, what do you call it?
Are you saying the passengers were paid off too?
Say the passengers were paid off.
What would be the incentive to pay off somebody to do that? I mean, they're going to
die.
Yeah. Like, here, let me give you money to go kill yourself. That's like, because the money is worthless at that point.
It is worthless.
See, money doesn't motivate these terrorists. What motivates these terrorists is, you know, they're doing this for Allah, and they're doing this for their movement. They want to go get their 72 virgins, which is a bullshit hadith. But they want to get this, right? And it's just like, that's why they're doing it. They're not doing this for the money. Now, I know that you're probably looking at the whole, you know, the Saudi Arabia funding that dry run for 9/11 information that came out, which, you know, I admit that is weird, but that still does not link the U.S. government to 9/11, and I think that's where you're having a problem here. Is that there really is no direct link. And again, so many people were involved and were involved if this was fake. There's no way this wouldn't have gotten out. But again, you still haven't answered the question of why you think, Brian asked you earlier, why you think that, like,
what's your evidence?
Yeah, what's your evidence?
My evidence, like I said, I only can go based off of memory because of my computer not responding very great. From what I remember is looking at some of the passengers, like having still like pictures from like 2012, 2008, and still living their lives. Apparently,
what's the chance that it's someone else though?
There is a good chance it's someone else. I just don't know. It's a conspiracy.
So wait a minute. You're saying that passengers who crashed or survived and are now living their lives and they're not mangled in any sort of way. They fell 30,000 feet into a field
and blew up.
Yeah, and blew up, and they're not mangled in any way, shape, or form.
You see, that's the plot hole in the plot hole in the
plot hole is they're all dead. Plot hole filled. They're dead.
Yeah, but
they're dead.
I mean, what you say might look like them could just be somebody that looks like them. It's not necessarily them. You know, there's billions of people that you're bound to have a few people look like you. And I think maybe, you know, I mean, just look at all the mistaken identities we have in court cases. It happens all the time because you have people that match the description of the suspect. And I'm thinking what happens is you're seeing a picture from 2001, which is probably pretty crappy, of somebody, and you're comparing it to a much more improved photo, and you're saying, wow, they look alike. That must be the person. So somehow, some way, they survived the plane crash. So conspiracy. I think there's a much more logical approach. It's kind of like if I handed you a picture and it was a crop circle.
Brian?
And it's, yes.
Yeah. You cut out for a second there. Can you say that again?
Yeah, what was the last thing you guys heard?
Crop circle.
Crop circle.
It would be like if there's a crop circle. I handed you a picture of a crop circle and the crop circle spelled out my name. It's possible aliens did that and I took the picture, or it's possible I just edited it on Photoshop. And before we go to an out of this world explanation of what happened, like aliens did it, we have to first consider the real world situation, which is it was probably just done on Photoshop. So before we get into all these, you know, conspiracies, we have to consider more logical outcomes.
Outcomes. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I mean, it seems to me that you don't really think you're not really one of those conspiracy theorists who is saying it was for sure a conspiracy. You're just saying
No,
there's like interesting
no,
questions.
it's like to me, it's like a possibility. Like it's a good possibility it could happen, but I'm not like saying it's 100% sure. It
Okay, so,
was just
so you're open-minded about it. Now, let me ask you this. I want to get into incentives. What do you think, in your opinion, was the incentive for the U.S. government to kill 3,000 people in the attack?
um I really don't know. Like I believe some parts, like there's always going to be like a bad in the inside the good, a corrupt part in the government. So I believe some part of the corrupt would want it to have that, maybe as a this sort of distraction, maybe as
From
this
what?
for I necessarily wouldn't know, but I like most people want to say it's just to blame Muslims, but I don't think that's the case.
So you don't really know
But
why they would do it. We don't really have a motive either.
no, it's there's no motive here. It's just like,
So they just did it because they were like memes. I hate the U.S.
well,
people.
no, not that. To me, it's kind of hidden. Like there's no evidence on why they would do it, but there's only people making theories of how they did. I mean, why they did it.
Well, what's the theory you think's most likely on why they did it?
It would just be a corrupt part of the government, not just for because, but they had the specific reasons for doing it. But I just don't know the exact.
So they just had some reason, but we don't know what that reason is.
I mean, there's a possibility. I'm not 100% sure.
Sure, but it's also more likely that they had no affiliation with that whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's possible that aliens were really behind 9/11, but the much more realistic idea is that you had terrorists hijack a plane and crash it into
Yeah.
the Twin
See,
Towers.
I feel like the terrorists had a much more of an incentive, and their attack was driven by hatred, right? Whereas like for us to do that to our own people seems a bit more
There's no
extreme. I can
reason.
create a conspiracy theory about anything. I could say that, like Brian said, I could say that aliens paid the terrorists to do it, and I could find some sort of hieroglyphic crop circle and like make up some phony explanation for why that's there, and then link that somehow. I mean, you could essentially, link it up to anything. But at the end of the day, you pretty much have to go with the most reasonable answer to everything. I mean, we obviously don't have all of the answers to 9/11, right? And we're never going to know everything. I will tell you right now, we
Yeah.
will never know everything about the attack. But and then humans do this in general, and you see this in every time when there's questions not answered. Humans tend to say, well, I don't know that, I want to figure it out, and they start taking information from random places, taking like maybe something that doesn't really mean anything and add, okay, well, this is the conspiracy now, I'll put this with this and this, and it just creates a conspiracy because they want to know. We're curious as creatures naturally, and so we seek to find answers to things that maybe we don't know, and maybe we shouldn't seek to find the answers to, because it'll just lead us down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories like the 9/11 theory.
Yes. Oh yeah, like you said earlier, I'm like very open minded about this conspiracy right here. Like it's just like
Do
whether
you
if it's
do you have any other evidence to kind of back up your claim, or any other claims you'd like to make before we move on to maybe another conspiracy?
okay. So like
And by the
basically,
way, and real quick, anyone watching the chat, if you want to debate us, just let us know. We're kind of debating conspiracy theories right now. So either leave a message in the chat or DM one of us. So sorry, go ahead.
all right, it's okay. Okay, so basically, like for example, the plane. Now, one of you guys mentioned earlier that that the bombs were fake and it was impossible for it to happen. Now you see, there's been conspiracy theories that like were already implanted within the building as soon as the plane crashed to make
But
it have that.
so you're
Well,
so
real
you're
quick,
saying that, wait, is this the Tannerite argument that it was already in there?
Um, the I don't
you
think
think
we
bombs were
mentioned.
planted, right?
Well, it's a good possibility that it could have been
But how would
planted.
that have happened?
Don't.
There's nobody saw anything strange at all.
And
Like, I mean,
also,
Oh
the
yeah,
way
of
the
course.
buildings, the way the
the
towers
world.
fell, the way the towers fell, if you had bombs at the base of it, the tower fell on top of the point of impact, which seems to imply the weak link, if you will, of the structure was where the plane hit. That's why you saw the building. At first, it collapsed from the top through the hit point.
Mm-hmm.
So if there were
And
bombs
the way it
places, you
fell,
wouldn't see it fell that way.
if you look at the way it fell, it kind of like fell in on itself as well. And the reason that happened is because, like, yes, there is an argument like jet fuel can't melt steel beams, right? Jet fuel does not get to a high enough temperature to melt steel beams. However, with the paper in the building and everything burning and all the wood, all the desks, everything like that, it gets to a hot enough level to where it'll fall in itself. It would have needed bombs, right? It would have been hot enough within the trade center to fall, and then weight would have done the rest for you. I mean, this has been, I mean, you can look up videos on YouTube. This has been demonstrated, hundreds of times by engineers.
And if there was any bombs, the bombs would have to been placed right where the plane crashed, because that's where it collapsed on itself. So that doesn't seem to make much sense.
Well, I mean, for the bombs, like how you was mentioning that have engineers have like tested in themselves and saying, like, what do you call it? That it was eventually going to melt, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, eventually going to melt. I mean, but I believe you call it the jet fuel. I mean, yes, maybe that could have happened, but
no, I don't think it was going to melt. It didn't need to melt. It just needed to get hot enough to warp the shape of the steel.
Yeah, it doesn't need to melt all the way. It just needs to get hot enough to bend and break.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it just needs to get to that certain point. Now, I'm trying to remember. I believe the jet fuel was like around like half the temperature that the steel beams could take.
True, but it also weakens it. I mean, I think some engineers' estimates had it about, it was only at 10% strength.
Jet fuel burns at 1500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah. So, like, I'm just thinking something could have probably helped spark it, maybe just a little bit more, just to make sure the fall happened.
But again, you wouldn't have needed. Again, okay. So number one, first problem with that argument is that you'd have to provide some sort of evidence of people planting bombs. I mean, I think somebody would have noticed people planting bombs in the World Trade Center at some point if that was happening. There are zero reports of that.
And then also, if they were to put that there, I mean, that's not really necessary. If they did put it there, then the towers should have collapsed a lot sooner than they actually did. If they had some additional secret formula fuel that they just poured in the building, which again, I don't know how they wouldn't have noticed that, you would have thought the towers would have collapsed much sooner than they actually did. This is about, I mean, the towers did last a pretty long time. It gave a lot of people time to leave the building. Had you had this secret formula thing, I think it would have collapsed much, much sooner. I don't think it would have lasted an hour.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't really like say that. I would just say that they, if anything, the bombs, if it were supposedly to have been included, I think it would have just been the thing, like just to make sure it for sure happened. But in your cases, you guys seem, I mean, it seems more believable that way. But again, this conspiracy theory. It's not supposed to be like thing that actually have happened. So
essentially, you're just making it up.
Well, no, I'm not making it up, but it's just what people believe. It's just a theory.
Yeah, but like, there's no evidence behind it, so people believing it. You can believe whatever you want, but you should. There's a famous quote, and it goes, "Allow evidence to determine your worldview, not the opposite." Right, and I think that's what a lot of conspiracy theorists are doing, especially when it comes to 9/11, is they're saying, "Well, let's allow my worldview to determine the evidence." Right? They have a projected idea of the government's corruptness coming into it, and they say, "Well, the government's corrupt; they must have done it." It's like, well, how'd they do it? Oh, well, they planted bombs. Well, how'd they plant bombs? Oh, they just did. It doesn't matter how. They're the government. They can do whatever they want. I don't know. It seems, I understand that there could have been a motive for the U.S. government to do something like this, right? But at the same time, there was much more of a motive for the Middle Easterners to do this because they were angry with us and they had tried it before. Was it a conspiracy theory when they tried it before and it failed? No. But if it had succeeded the first time, people would be saying that was a conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
If this attack had failed, nobody would be saying this is a conspiracy. It's only that it was successful that they're saying it's a conspiracy. And that's why I don't believe conspiracy theories.
And think about how risky that would be for an administration. Like if people found out, like, hey, you planted bombs in this building, you try to kill Americans and bring down towers, that administration would be absolutely crucified. That would be such a ballsy thing to do. I don't see anyone rolling the dice on that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you have any other piece of evidence or claim, or do you want to move on to a new conspiracy?
Well, no, not really. It's just like the building, building 7, right?
Yeah.
Or like it's just that there's been many speculations that like it just there was no reason for it to have gone fire, but I mean, to me, I don't really see that being a conspiracy. Like it could have just have happened. I don't know the story behind the building 7.
You had a lot of debris fall on it. Like a lot of people only know about those 3 buildings. There's also a church that was destroyed because you had falling debris. The same thing happened with the World Trade Center 7. So you had falling debris from the buildings smash into it, basically.
Yeah, if you're in the immediate radius of 2 mammoth towers falling, like that's not going to be pretty. And then there's that picture of like, well, if you look at the firefighters gathering around the site of World Trade Center, there's a shining glow, and it's just like, I mean, people are literally going to make a conspiracy theory out of anything they can get their hands on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to move on to something else?
Yeah.
Chemtrails, because I know that you are a believer in the chemtrails theory, along with Sir Alex Jones. So why don't you present your argument? What is the motive of the U.S. government to be releasing these so-called chemicals?
Well, I believe it's usually This is usually used to push propaganda around and to influence people to have certain choices to separate us.
What chemical does that?
Well,
because I can't think of any.
Don't you think the media does a good enough job of dividing us? Why do we need a chemical?
I mean, I'm not a chemist. That's not my field of study.
It's not.
I've taken chemistry classes, and I have a basic understanding of chemistry. I can't think of any chemical that does that.
Well, we know how water vapor works, and that's essentially what it is that you see at the back of the plane.
Yeah.
Well,
it's kind of like, have you ever started your car when it's really, really cold out?
Yeah.
And do you know the smoke that comes popping out of it?
Yeah.
And like you see it sometimes from sewers in like New York City, like the smoke comes from the sewers.
Yeah, I've seen it.
It's literally the same thing. Except it's on a plane and it's in the sky.
Well, I wouldn't know exactly what chemical. I would agree with you. Like I only have a basic understanding, and I don't know what chemical would have done it. I believe like there could have possibly been scientists to have made a formula to possibly made the chemicals have a certain reacting.
So let's say this mystery chemical was like constructed and synthesized in a lab. Don't you think we would have more symptoms, like more obvious symptoms that something is up?
Let me ask you this: when did these chemtrails begin? Right? When did these begin? Because
they've always been around.
No. But no, I'm asking him, when does he think the chemicals were inserted into the compound? Because contrails have always been around. Contrails have always been spit out. So at what point did the government say, hey, let's put chemicals into that, right? And the chemicals, you're barium, aluminum, and copper and strontium, right?
Yeah.
Strontium. Okay.
Well,
those are the chemicals you believe are in there, right?
Let's see.
And just to talk about Dylan's point, there actually was a battle in World War II with planes. I believe it was the British and the German. And I think it was like a really cold day, and the sky was like pale blue. And they left like a really obvious contrail. So it was very easy for the Germans to shoot them down. There's actually a huge report on it.
Brian, online. I just want to say your storytelling ability is fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
I love how you went into detail about how the sky looked and the temperature outside in general.
Let me paint the picture. I should be like author. But yeah, and basically there's actually a report on it because, you know, those planes were shot down by the Germans because, oh, there's their contrail, go shoot them. So when they say like the sky never used to look like this, no, we just have more planes now. You know?
Yeah, and people notice it now because it's a conspiracy theory. Like, you're gonna start noticing things if you make it into a conspiracy.
Yeah. People that make everything a conspiracy, but usually I wouldn't think the chemtrails wouldn't have been used like so much back then. Like, I believe it's more heavily used as in like this generation. Like, for example, I believe it's been used heavily to influence people like on the left to have influenced their politics, and which is causing like a lot of segregation between the people.
So you think liberals are
the media
us?
does that enough? Why would we need to?
Well, I'm not saying the U.S. government is doing it. I'm just saying it's just happening.
Well, who's doing it?
Well, I wouldn't know.
You said like liberals? Up in the sky.
Well, no, like it's influencing them, like to have these ideas.
Consider this, like FDR was one of the most liberal presidents we've ever had. Were they spraying chemicals on the people then? Or were the people just liberal at that time?
Well, I think it was just more of a...
What about in Europe? They're more liberal over there.
Wait, what?
What about like in Europe where they're more liberal? Are they spraying them with chemicals, or are they just more liberal?
There's a possibility, but I really haven't like done conspiracies outside the U.S. I only done conspiracies within the U.S.
So basically the point I'm getting at is there's also the possibility that millennials are pretty liberal. Like, that's just the way that's their tendencies. It doesn't mean they're being sprayed with chemicals.
Oh yeah, but what do you call it?
Like, if you notice, generations have a tendency to rebel against the previous one. Like Generation Z, one of the most conservative generations, is basically a rebellion against millennials. Millennials, rebelled against baby boomers, and baby boomers against the greatest generation, all that stuff. So it's not uncommon to see generations change their political affiliation.
Well, I just like it. Just like I'm a millennial myself, so like, but what do you call it? I tend to believe it because like the majority of us millennials are in a way, like you said, we are against the previous generation before us, like so heavily, and we are against each other.
That actually brings up a good point. Why are there millennials that aren't liberals then? Why aren't you one? If the chemicals, are you just immune to it?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm immune to it. I honestly wouldn't know. It's like, it's a theory.
And how does it? And what chemical like makes you change parties? Like, oh, take this, you become a Republican, or drink this, you become a Democrat.
I mean, there's
Did you know that there's a big conspiracy theory they're spraying chemicals, but there was a group of scientists that I'll pull up the study. I can send a link to the chat here. They had 77 scientists get together. 76 of them said there was no evidence of chemtrails, and all of them ran tests, and they found that the chemicals that were in the water and the air, they were trying to say, they said they found no 80 to 89% could be explained by phenomena much more simple than chemtrails. The chemtrail craze originated with a 1996 report from the Air Force called Weather, a Force Multiplier, which speculates how the military could develop weather modification technology by 2025. And then there was a patent filed in 1991 for a technique of seeding the upper atmosphere with particles that could reflect sunlight and snow and slow global warming, combined with anecdotal tales of plants dying and people getting sick after planes left or whatever. But I mean, I feel like, I mean, let's take it, I don't understand how that would be an effective method for the government to release chemicals. I mean, don't you think they could do it through other methods as well? I mean, why would they do it through planes? And these are private companies, right? Like Southwest Airlines, American Airlines, all these are private companies.
Yeah.
So you're assuming that the government has access to these private companies and that the private companies wouldn't reject that, or anybody wouldn't have let that out. Like no private company would have said, no, I'm not putting those in my planes, and then take it public and say, hey, they just wanted me to put chemicals inside of my plane. Like,
and spray it on you guys.
Come out.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm
not
I'm not saying I'm a believer in this, but like there's other.
You said you were in the DMs.
Huh?
You said you were a believer in this in the DMs.
Oh yeah, no, not this, the chemical trails, but you were mentioning earlier like how if they were gonna do it another way, like to control or like influence people. I'm not saying like what I'm about to mention is I'm not a believer in.
Oh, okay.
Like there people are saying like they what do you call it? They mentioned that what do you call it? That they put it in the foods or they put it in call it.
Yeah, but again, you have to remember the majority of these foods that we're eating come from private companies, right? This isn't the government does not have a monopoly on food. Therefore, the government would have to approach
the Soviet Union.
Yeah, the government would have to approach these private companies and say, hey, you need to start inserting this chemical into all your foods. And if private companies were like, hey, that's a poison, I'm not going to do that, then they would run out and tell other people that was going on. And you got to remember, a lot of these companies fly internationally, right? A lot of these companies, a lot of these foods are served internationally. So it's like, even if they don't accept it in the United States, it'll still be served in other places or whatever. So it's just, it seems to me that, you know, if chemtrails are real, that number one, it never, you know, that no private company has come out and said that this is happening. No government officials come out and said this is happening. And there's absolutely zero evidence for it. So I just don't see the evidence there for chemtrails to be legitimate.
Yeah. It just seems it's inconvenient for me at the time because like, I mean, because usually like I like right here I live in Florida, but like usually where I'm at it's like a bunch of like millennials who are like leftists or they're a bunch of leftists, and like I'm like usually the very few that are on a certain type of political party or have political views that are very different from everybody else's. So like to me, this seems like a pretty convenient conspiracy theory to believe.
How about this? How about instead? How old are you? First off,
16.
You're 16. Okay, so you're young. You're in high school. Why don't you go like start a Republican club or something at your school, or a libertarian club or whatever?
Florida's
because our principal wouldn't allow it.
The school won't allow it.
Like I remember, they don't allow anything like that's like conservative or anything like that. For example, like I remember my friend got suspended for wearing a Trump hat.
I think they have to. Is it a public school or a private school?
It's a public school.
I'm pretty sure they have to allow that because I know even at least for colleges, liberal colleges, they have to allow people to make their Republican Party.
But I don't know. Our principal, like he's pretty hypocritical. Like he says we're not allowed to wear clothes like that's anything political. That's like for Trump or that's Republican, but when it's Democrat or Hillary Clinton or Sanders, he doesn't give a crap about.
That goes above your principal's head. Like that, your principal is like a peon compared to where that comes from. Like even Berkeley, probably more liberal than the school you go to. They have a Republican club. It's moderately big. It's a big campus, so obviously it will be. But they have a Republican club. So if you really wanted to, you probably could. Yeah, I'm sure you could find conservatives to talk to. Just because there happens to be a lot of liberal. I mean, Trump just won the election, right? So obviously the chemicals aren't doing a very good job.
Yeah.
So is there any other point you want to make, or do you want to talk about another conspiracy?
No, not really. There's no other conspiracy that I mentioned.
All right. Was there any other you happen to believe, or are you good to go?
No, I'm good to go.
So at the end of the debate, can we agree that 9/11 was not a conspiracy?
Yeah.
And can we agree that chemtrails are not real?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That concludes our debate here, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you like and share. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any more. I will catch up with you guys next time. Bye-bye.